My name is Margaret, but that isn't the name my mother whispered over my crib when I was a baby. That name, the one tied to the girl I used to be, was buried years ago, somewhere in the shadows of a house on Willow Street. It was the early 1960s, in the small rural town of Clearwater Springs, a place where everyone knew each other's business and life moved to the steady rhythm of seasons and Sunday sermons. The air smelled of pine after rain, the train still passed twice a day, and children could ride their bicycles down Main Street without anyone thinking twice about it. So if you're watching, baby, go ahead and like this video, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. 'Cause this ain't just my story, it's the story of too many women who had to smile through the silence. Our home sat 3 blocks from the town square, a modest, single-story, wooden house painted cream with green shutters that had faded under years of sun. In front was a patch of grass bordered by my mother's flower beds, where marigolds and petunias fought for space. Out back, she had a vegetable patch so neatly kept you could walk the rows without brushing a leaf. Behind the garden stood an old chicken coop and a weathered tin washtub that doubled as my summer playpen when the heat rolled in. I'd splash my small hands in the cool water, laughing while the smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen window. My mother, Eleanor, was the kind of woman people described as proper, polite in company, always with her hair pinned into a perfect bun, never a wrinkle in her blouse. But beneath that neat exterior was a softness that only I saw. She had deep brown eyes that could soothe me without a word, and hands that never seemed to rest, sewing, baking, tending to the house from dawn until well after dark. My father, Thomas Hale, was the opposite. A career Navy man, tall with broad shoulders, his hair clipped so short the sun glinted off his scalp. Even in civilian clothes, he stood like a man on parade, back ramrod straight, chin slightly raised. He had transferred to the Clearwater Springs Naval Training Facility, so my mother could stay close to her aging parents. But the discipline of the base followed him home, like an unshakable shadow. Everything in our house ran on his schedule. Coffee on the table at 6 a.m. sharp. Lunch at noon, not a minute late. Dinner at 6 p.m. exactly. Towels were folded with military precision, shoes lined up perfectly in the closet. My father inspected every corner as if our home were barracks. And if something was not to his liking, his correction was swift and without room for argument. When he spoke, my mother's eyes would lower to the tablecloth, and her hands, always working, would adjust something that didn't need adjusting. She rarely disagreed with him out loud, but in the quiet moments, when the house was still, she would tell me bedtime stories in a hushed voice, her arm curled protectively around me. I was an only child. Mother would tell people, God sent me one special daughter, because I couldn't bear to share her with anyone. At the time, I believed it. Now, I suspect it was a softer way of explaining that she could not have more children. Being the only one meant I carried every ounce of my parents' expectations, and their disappointments, alone. My days were filled with the kind of routines small-town children knew by heart. Clearwater Springs Elementary was a 15-minute walk down shaded streets. My mother sewed my school dresses, blue cotton with white collars, just like the other girls' uniforms, only mine had her stitches in the hem. I wore my dark hair in braids tied with white ribbons, and carried a brown leather satchel that had once belonged to my father. My first-grade teacher, Mrs. Webb, was a patient woman with a voice like warm honey. She noticed I loved to draw and surprised me on my 8th birthday with a set of colored pencils. I treasured them like gold. My father called them a waste and said I should focus on useful skills, but my mother tucked them in a box under my bed, and I would draw in secret when he wasn't home. The neighborhood children and I played jump rope, ring around the rosy, and London Bridge in the dusty back lanes. My two closest friends were Lydia, who lived 3 houses down and owned 5 rag dolls her grandmother had made, and Claire, whose father ran the bakery on Main Street. Claire always brought something sweet in her satchel to share, a piece of cake, a cinnamon bun, sometimes a whole apple turnover. On Sunday afternoons, if my father was in a decent mood, we would walk down to the town square or the little park behind the courthouse. On rare occasions, we even went to the Clearwater Springs Fair, where the Ferris wheel lit up the night sky and the smell of fried dough filled the air. My mother loved the fair. She'd spend the day before starching my Sunday dress and polishing my single pair of patent leather shoes. The biggest event of the year was the Harvest Jubilee in October. The streets would be lined with vendors, musicians, and handmade quilts flapping in the autumn wind. My father didn't like crowds, but Mother always found a way to take me for at least half an hour to see the lights and hear the fiddlers play. I was 9 when I began to notice something, a shift in the air at home. My father's voice was sharper, his patience thinner. Small mistakes, a fork out of place, a shirt hung slightly crooked, could set him off. Sometimes after I'd gone to bed, I'd hear muffled voices in the kitchen, the scrape of a chair, and then the sound of something shattering against the wall. Mother would appear at breakfast the next day with eyes slightly puffy, blaming it on the goldenrod pollen in the yard, even though the blooms were long gone for the season. I didn't question it then. In Clearwater Springs, you didn't talk about what happened behind closed doors. By the time I turned 10, the tension had tightened like a rope in our house. That was the year of the spring social at school. Every girl needed a skirt that would swirl for the dance. My mother spent weeks sewing mine from scraps she'd saved, soft blue fabric with tiny white flowers, a ribbon trim at the hem. When I twirled in it, the skirt flared out like a bell. The day before the dance, my father came home early and saw me wearing it. He stared for a moment, his face unreadable, then stepped forward and ripped it down the seam with one violent motion. "You will not parade around like some fool at a pagan festival," he snapped, tossing the ruined fabric onto the floor. That was the first time I saw my mother stand her ground, though her voice trembled. "She's a child, Thomas. It's a school dance." He glared at her, then left without another word. That night, after he'd gone to bed, Mother pulled out her sewing machine and worked in the dim light of the kitchen lamp. By morning, a new skirt, nearly identical to the first, hung over the back of my chair. "Go," she said softly. "Have fun." I danced that evening, laughing with Lydia and Claire, the ribbon trim brushing against my knees. But when we got home, he was waiting, sitting in the armchair with his belt folded across his lap. That night would be the first time I truly understood what it meant to pay for joy in our house. I was 10 years old the night the belt came down for the first time. It wasn't the sting across my legs that haunted me, it was the silence afterward. No shouting, no scolding, no lecture about discipline or respect. Just the heavy sound of his breathing as he walked away, leaving me standing there with my skirt bunched in my fists and my mother frozen in the kitchen doorway. That silence was worse than the blows. It told me something in him had shifted, and I didn't yet know how deep that shift would go. After that night, the air inside our little house on Willow Street seemed heavier, as though the walls had absorbed some unspoken threat. My mother became more careful with her words, moving around the house like a shadow. I noticed how often she'd glance toward the door before speaking to me, lowering her voice even when we were alone. My father, Thomas Hale, had always been strict, but now there was a new edge to it, sharper, more personal. He started finding fault in things that had never been a problem before. The way I walked, the way I held my fork, even the way I tied the ribbons in my hair. "You slouch like a boy," he'd snap. Or, "You're not some actress. Stop swinging your hips when you walk." At first, I tried to correct whatever he criticized, thinking it might ease the tension. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. I began to realize that the rules weren't rules at all. They were moving targets, shifting whenever he wanted to remind me who was in control. My mother, Eleanor, found small ways to protect me. If she sensed he was coming home in a foul mood, she would send me to her mother's house to deliver eggs or help with baking. Grandma Ruth lived just 6 streets away, in a white clapboard cottage that always smelled of cinnamon and soap. Her house was my sanctuary, warm, cluttered in a comforting way, and full of the little freedoms I didn't have at home. She'd let me take my shoes off in the living room, read comic books at the table, and eat dessert before dinner just to make me laugh. We'd make fudge or roll dough for sugar cookies while she hummed old hymns under her breath. "Busy hands keep the sadness away," she'd say, pressing a ball of dough into my palms. At night, I'd sleep in the spare bedroom under a quilt she'd sewn decades earlier, feeling, if only for a night, that the world could be soft and safe. But even in that haven, there was an unspoken understanding that I couldn't stay too long. If I wasn't home before my father's shift ended, there would be consequences for both me and my mother. By the time I turned 11, my father's control extended into every corner of my life. He decided what I wore: long skirts that brushed my ankles, high-collared blouses that made me itch, heavy sweaters even in mild weather. My braids, once tied with ribbons, were replaced with a single tight bun at the base of my neck. He began timing my walk home from school. If I was more than a minute late, he'd accuse me of lingering or loitering with boys. I stopped walking with my friends altogether, too afraid of being delayed. The mirror that had hung on my bedroom wall since I was a toddler disappeared one day. "You're too young to be standing around admiring yourself," he said flatly when I asked where it went. He replaced the light floral curtains in my room with heavy, dark fabric that blocked most of the sunlight. Even the bathroom wasn't free from his rules. "No locks on doors in this house," he declared, removing the small latch from the inside. "And no more than 15 minutes in the shower. You're not running up the water bill for vanity." It was around this time that the nights changed. At first, I thought I was imagining it, waking to a faint creak in the hallway or a shadow at the edge of my vision. But soon I knew it wasn't my imagination. I would open my eyes in the dark and see him standing in the half-open doorway of my room. Just standing. Watching. He never said a word. After a few minutes, he would turn and walk away, the floorboards groaning under his weight. I learned to keep my breathing slow and steady, pretending to be asleep while my heart pounded in my chest. One morning, I told my mother about it while she was kneading bread. She stopped mid-motion, her hands frozen in the dough, but she didn't look at me. "You must be dreaming," she said. But her voice trembled, and I saw the fear flash in her eyes before she turned back to her work. That was the moment I understood something important. My mother was not ignoring what was happening. She was afraid in the same way I was. We were both prisoners in different cells of the same house. School became my only breath of normalcy, though even that was slipping away. I'd sit in the back of the classroom, keeping my head down, focusing on my work. But the weight of home followed me like a shadow. I jumped whenever the teacher called my name, my stomach tightening at sudden noises. Miss Carter, my English teacher, was the first to notice. "Margaret, is everything all right at home?" she asked one afternoon, her voice low and careful. I forced a smile and said yes, the same answer I'd been taught to give since I could speak. In Clearwater Springs, people didn't pry into what happened behind closed doors. By 12, my body was changing in ways that made my father's gaze linger too long. My mother spoke to me in whispers about becoming a young lady and how I needed to be careful. But the way she said it, her voice more warning than congratulation, made me uneasy. One evening, we were having dinner, pork roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, when my fork slipped and clattered onto the plate. My father's eyes snapped to mine. "You eat like a clumsy child," he said sharply. "I'm sorry," I murmured, lowering my gaze. He set his fork down slowly, his eyes still fixed on me. "Look at me when I'm speaking." I lifted my head, and for a moment, it felt like the air between us changed. His gaze wasn't the cold, disciplinary stare I knew so well. It was something else, something that made my skin crawl, and my pulse hammer in my ears. My mother reached for the serving spoon, her movements deliberate. "Thomas, would you like more beans?" she asked, breaking the moment. He glanced at her, then back at me, before finally turning his attention to his plate. We finished the meal in silence, but I felt that gaze long after I left the table. A week later, I woke to the familiar creak of the hallway floorboards. My room was dimly lit by the moonlight seeping through the gap in the heavy curtains. The door opened wider this time. His silhouette filled the doorway, then stepped inside. My breath caught in my throat. He sat down on the edge of my bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. "You're growing up," he said quietly. His hand reached out, stopping just short of touching my cheek. I turned my face toward the wall, every muscle in my body rigid. He lingered for what felt like hours, then stood and walked out, closing the door behind him. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, my mother avoided my eyes while she poured coffee. Her hand shook slightly as she placed my oatmeal in front of me. That was the morning I understood that something was building, something worse than the rules, the watching, or the belt. And I didn't know if either of us could stop it. The winter I turned 12 in Clearwater Springs was one of the coldest I could remember. Frost-etched patterns across the windows each morning, and the old tin washtub in the yard froze solid overnight. The cold seemed to settle not just in the air, but in our house, in the spaces between words, in the way my mother moved, in the quiet dread that curled in my stomach every evening. By then, my father's controlling rules had become routine. Long skirts, hair in a bun, no lingering after school, no locked doors, no mirrors. The unspoken rule was even more suffocating: don't provoke him. Don't give him a reason to notice you more than necessary. But some nights, it didn't matter. He would notice anyway. It began on a night so ordinary that nothing should have marked it in my memory. Supper had pork chops and boiled carrots. My mother washed dishes while I dried. My father read the newspaper in his chair as he did most evenings. I went to bed early, curling under the quilt my grandmother had made me. The air was cold enough that my breath formed faint clouds in the moonlight streaming through the gap in my heavy curtains. I was on the edge of sleep when the floorboards creaked. The door opened. This was not unusual anymore. I had grown used to him standing in the doorway, watching. But this time, he stepped inside. His shadow loomed larger as he approached the bed. In his hand was a plain glass filled with milk. "Wake up," he said, his voice low but firm. I sat up slowly, the quilt clutched around me. "Yes, sir. Drink this. It'll help you sleep." I took the glass, still warm from his hand, and lifted it to my lips. The sour smell hit me first, sharp and rancid. I hesitated. It's spoiled, I whispered. Drink it. I looked at him, hoping for some sign that this was a joke, a test, anything but what it was. But his eyes were flat, expectant. I took a sip, the curdled texture hitting my tongue like wet chalk. My stomach turned. All of it, he ordered. My hands shook as I forced down the rest, each swallow worse than the last. When I tried to hand the glass back, he just stood there for a moment, looking at me in a way I didn't understand. Then he took it and left without another word. I lay there for a long time afterward, the taste lingering, my stomach aching. The next night, it happened again. Same glass, same smell, same order. By the third night, I realized this wasn't random. It was something new, a ritual. There was no explanation, no reason. Only his command and my obedience. Within days, I began waking each morning with a sour smell clinging to me that soap and water couldn't fully remove. My skin broke out in red blotches. My hair, once shiny, turned dull and brittle. At school, whispers followed me down the hall. "What's that smell?" someone would murmur. Once, a boy covered his nose as I passed. My two closest friends, Lydia and Claire, started keeping their distance. I pretended not to notice. It took me longer to understand what this was really about. It wasn't about the milk. It wasn't even about the sickness it caused. It was about isolation. If I smelled bad, if my hair looked unwashed, if my skin was blotchy, people would avoid me. And if no one came close, I had no one to talk to, no one to confide in. Cruelty doesn't always leave bruises you can point to. Sometimes, it's the quiet stripping away of dignity, the slow convincing of someone that they are untouchable. After 2 weeks of this, I broke. One afternoon while we were alone in the kitchen, I told my mother. "He makes me drink spoiled milk every night," I whispered. "It makes me sick." Her hands, dusted with flour, froze mid-need. She didn't look at me right away. When she did, her eyes were wet. "I'll talk to him," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll make him stop." That night, I heard their voices through the thin walls. Not shouting, my father rarely raised his voice at her, but something harder. The tone he used when his mind was set. The following evening, he came to my room with not one glass, but 2. First, he ordered me to drink. The second, he poured over my head. The cold, rancid liquid soaked my hair, slid down my neck, and seeped into my nightgown. "This is for telling lies about your father," he said. "If you keep it up, it'll be worse next time." I sat on the bed afterward, shivering, the smell filling my nose until I wanted to scream. But I didn't scream. I cleaned the floor. I washed the sheets in the bucket I kept hidden under my bed. I scrubbed myself until my skin burned. That was the night I stopped telling my mother about what he did to me. She was as trapped as I was. Her love couldn't stop him. So I began adapting. I cut my hair short under the pretense of wanting a modern style, but really it was to make washing out the milk easier. I hid small pieces of soap and clean nightclothes under my mattress. After he left, I'd change quickly, scrub myself in the dark, and hide the soiled clothes until I could wash them without him noticing. It didn't always work. The smell still clung to me. The more I smelled, the more alone I became. Lydia stopped inviting me to play after school. Claire no longer saved me pieces of cake. In the cafeteria, no one sat beside me unless there was no other choice. One day in the hallway, a girl I didn't know wrinkled her nose and said loudly, "She stinks." Laughter rippled around me. I kept walking, my head down, focusing on each step until I was safely in the girls' bathroom. There, I stood in front of the sink, gripping the porcelain so hard my knuckles went white. I thought of running away then, just walking until I couldn't walk anymore. But I knew where that would lead. Back to him. Always back to him. By the time I was 13, the ritual had been going on for over a year. Sometimes he'd spill the milk on the bed, forcing me to scrub the mattress at midnight to learn to be clean. Other times, he'd accidentally let it run down my hair into my eyes. Then one night, he didn't bring the glass right away. I lay in bed, wide awake, waiting. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Finally, the door opened. But his hands were empty. He sat on the edge of my bed and stared at me. "You're getting older," he said slowly. "Pretty soon, you'll be a young woman." I stayed still, my heart pounding in my ears. He smiled faintly, not a kind smile, but one that made my skin crawl. "We'll have to make sure you grow up the right way." Then he stood and left. I knew then that something worse was coming. The milk ritual, for all its cruelty, was only the beginning. By the spring of my 13th year, the milk ritual was no longer the center of my fear. It still happened, sometimes every night, sometimes skipped for a day or two, but something had shifted. His eyes had changed. There was a new weight in the way he looked at me, a calculation that made me feel like I wasn't his daughter anymore, but something else entirely. I'd catch it at the dinner table, or when I was hanging laundry in the yard and felt the prickling at the back of my neck. I'd glance toward the house and see him at the kitchen window, watching. He didn't look away when I noticed. If anything, his gaze deepened, holding me in place until I turned away. It happened one night in late March. The air was still cold enough to see your breath outside, but inside, the house felt stifling. I was in bed, staring at the shadow of the curtains on the wall, when the door opened. No glass of milk this time. He came in and sat on the edge of my bed like he had before. I tensed immediately, my fingers twisting in the quilt. "You're becoming a young lady," he said quietly. His voice wasn't angry, and that was worse. His hand came to my cheek. I pulled back instinctively, my shoulders pressing into the wall. "Don't be afraid of your own father," he murmured. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavy. I wanted to scream, to call for my mother, but the fear rooted me in place. After a moment, he stood and left without another word. But that moment, that touch, stayed with me all night, a shadow under my skin. It didn't stop there. The next time he stayed longer, sitting in silence until the tension felt unbearable. His hand would find my arm, my hair, lingering in ways that made my heart pound with panic. By summer, the touches became bolder, and then, one night, they became something far worse. I won't describe it in detail. Some things are too heavy to put into words. I will only say that it was the night the girl named Margaret, the real Margaret, disappeared. Whatever part of me was still innocent, still untouched by darkness, was gone by morning. After that, the milk ritual faded into the background, replaced by this new torment. My mother must have known. There were mornings when she wouldn't meet my eyes, her face pale and drawn. She'd place my oatmeal in front of me with hands that trembled. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at me while she thought I wasn't looking, her eyes full of guilt and something close to helpless rage. But she never confronted him in front of me, never said the words out loud. I was as silent as she was. We were like two prisoners in adjoining cells, close enough to know the other was there, but unable to reach across the bars. It was early autumn when I first realized something was wrong. My monthly bleeding, always on time since it began, simply didn't come. I tried not to panic. Maybe it was late. Maybe the stress had stopped it. But when the second month passed, I knew. I was 15 years old, and I was carrying my father's child. I didn't tell my mother right away. I carried the knowledge like a stone in my stomach, dreading the moment I'd have to speak it aloud. But hiding it was impossible. The morning sickness started soon after, forcing me to dash to the back bathroom before dawn so he wouldn't hear. One afternoon, when he was at the base, I found my mother alone in the kitchen. The smell of bread baking filled the air. My voice shook so badly I could barely get the words out. "I think I'm pregnant." The bowl she was holding slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. She didn't move for a long moment. When she finally turned to me, her face was ashen. "Are you sure?" she whispered. I nodded, unable to repeat the words. She moved quickly then, sweeping up the broken pieces while glancing toward the front door as though expecting him to walk in at any moment. "He can't know," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Do you understand? If he finds out," she didn't finish. She didn't need to. We both knew the danger. For the next few weeks, we lived in a fragile state of denial. I wore the loosest blouses I owned. She made excuses for me when he asked why I wasn't eating much or why I seemed tired. She brewed teas she said would keep me strong, and slipped extra bread rolls onto my plate when he wasn't looking. We whispered at night about what might happen, but neither of us had a real plan. It was a gray Tuesday in November when everything unraveled. He came home from the base earlier than usual, his boots striking the floor like a drumbeat. I was helping my mother set the table when he walked in, scanning the room with a look I'd learned to fear. His eyes landed on me and didn't move. "Come here," he said. I froze. My mother stepped in quickly. "She's busy." "Now." I stepped toward him, my stomach already twisting. His gaze dropped to my midsection, lingering. When I instinctively folded my arms over it, I knew I'd given him his answer. "What's this?" he said, his voice low but dangerous. "Who did this to you?" I said nothing. He grabbed my arm. "Tell me." "It's not what you think," my mother began. "Shut up." He turned back to me. "Was it some boy from school? One of those punks hanging around the store? Tell me or it's yours." The words came from my mother, firm and steady. The room went silent. For a moment, he just stared at her, as if he couldn't process what she'd said. Then his face changed, confusion to understanding to rage, all in a heartbeat. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," she said, stepping between us. "The baby is yours. The result of what you've done to her night after night." I will never forget the look in his eyes then. It was the look of a man who'd been exposed, stripped of control in the one place he believed himself untouchable. His roar was the sound of a storm breaking. He lunged forward, shoving her so hard she slammed into the table. "Run, Margaret," she shouted. But I didn't run. I grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the stove and swung it with all my strength, hitting him square in the back. He stumbled forward, cursing. It gave my mother enough time to grab my arm, and together we fled to the backyard, slamming the kitchen door behind us. "There," my mother gasped, pointing to the pantry cabinet. "Help me." We shoved it against the door, the wood groaning under his pounding fists on the other side. "It won't hold for long," she said. "What do we do?" My voice was shaking. She glanced at me, her eyes blazing in a way I'd never seen before. "I've been planning for this." That was when she told me about the hidden money, the small suitcase under her bed, and the laxative. The plan she laid out was simple, almost naive. Get him to drink coffee laced with the powder, wait until it trapped him in the bathroom, and run. It sounded dangerous, reckless. It was also the only chance we had. The pounding on the kitchen door rattled the glass in its frame. Each blow from my father's fists made the pantry cabinet we'd shoved against it jump forward an inch. I could feel the vibrations in the floorboards through my bare feet. "We don't have much time," my mother said, her voice sharp but calm in a way that told me she'd been rehearsing this moment in her mind for a long time. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the far corner of the yard, where a row of bricks by the old wash basin looked slightly uneven. Dropping to her knees, she pried one loose, then another until she revealed a small hollow lined with an oilcloth. Inside was a wooden cigar box, worn smooth at the edges. "This," she said, thrusting it into my hands, "is what I've been saving for years. $1 here, a quarter there. Enough to get us far from Clearwater Springs." I opened the box and saw neat rolls of bills bound with twine, a small silver locket, and in the corner a folded wax paper packet of off-white powder. "What is this?" I asked. "Something I bought from Mrs. Rossetti at the pharmacy. Told her it was for me, intestinal troubles." My mother's mouth twisted into something like a grim smile. "It's a powerful laxative. Enough to keep him locked in the bathroom for hours." The cabinet inside groaned under another hard blow. A hinge screeched. "Here's what we do," she said quickly. "When he gets in here, I'll act like I've given up. I'll tell him we want to talk. I'll make him the coffee he likes with that sweet bread he can't resist. While he's distracted, I'll put the powder in his cup. And then, when he's doubled over in the bathroom, we grab the suitcase from under my bed, take the money, and go. There's a 6 p.m. bus to Kingsford. Once we're there, we can decide where to head next." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The plan sounded simple, too simple, but it was better than waiting for the door to give way. With a loud crack, one of the cabinet's legs splintered. A second later, the door burst inward, the cabinet sliding across the floor. My father filled the doorway, panting, a jagged piece of wood from the frame in his hand. His eyes were wild, darting between us. "You think you can lock me out of my own house?" he roared. My mother instantly changed. Her posture shrank, her head lowered, her voice soft and almost pleading. "We lost our heads, Thomas. But we want to talk. Think about the baby, your blood too. Please, let's sit and discuss it." The rage in his face flickered, replaced by suspicion. "Talk? After you've been running your mouths about me?" "Yes," she said, stepping forward cautiously. "Let me make you coffee like you like it. And that sweet bread you love. We can start over." He hesitated, still breathing hard, then lowered the piece of wood and followed her inside. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands folded in my lap, forcing myself to look small, harmless, afraid, which wasn't difficult. My father leaned against the counter, watching us. My mother moved with deliberate slowness, setting the kettle on the stove, slicing thick pieces of the golden sweet bread she'd baked that morning. I saw her hand slip into the pocket of her apron, felt my stomach tighten as she discreetly tapped the powder into one of the mugs. She poured coffee over it, added sugar, and stirred until it dissolved. "Drink while it's hot," she said, placing the cup in front of him and sliding the plate of bread closer. He sat down across from me, staring for a moment before taking a long sip. Then a bite of bread. Another sip. I counted each swallow in my head, willing the powder to work quickly. "You think I'll just forget what you said today?" he asked, his voice calmer now but still edged with threat. "No," my mother said evenly. "But we can move past it if we try. For the baby's sake." His gaze shifted to my stomach. "My son," he murmured, and something in his tone made bile rise in my throat. Then it happened, the faintest change in his face. A twitch. His brow furrowed. He shifted in his seat. I glanced at my mother. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the tiniest flicker of hope in her eyes. "What did you put in this?" he asked suddenly, his tone sharp. "Just sugar and a little cinnamon," she replied smoothly. He grunted, then stood abruptly, his hand pressing to his abdomen. "Something's not right." "Bathroom's that way," she said mildly, nodding toward the hall. He glared at us, but didn't argue. Within seconds, the sound of the bathroom door slamming was followed by a muffled groan. "Now," my mother whispered, already moving. She dashed to her bedroom and pulled the small suitcase from under the bed. I grabbed my school satchel from my room and stuffed in the locket, the photograph of Grandma Ruth, and a spare dress. From the bathroom came another groan, then a string of curses. We crept to the front door. My mother shoved the money from the cigar box into her handbag. The suitcase bumped against her knee as we stepped onto the porch. The late afternoon sun was low, throwing long shadows across Willow Street. We hurried, not daring to run outright in case someone saw us and called out. I could feel the heat of panic in my face, the pounding of my pulse in my throat. We cut across backyards, took the gravel path behind the Methodist church, and emerged 2 blocks from the bus station. The 6 p.m. bus to Kingsford was idling at the platform, a small plume of diesel smoke drifting from its exhaust. "To Kingsford," my mother said, her voice barely steady as she slid crumpled bills across the counter. The ticket clerk didn't look twice, just handed them over and turned to the next customer. We boarded quickly, heading straight for the back row. My mother placed the suitcase under the seat, her hands still gripping the handle like it might vanish if she let go. As the bus lurched forward, I looked out the window toward the end of Willow Street. In the distance, beyond the rooftops, I could see a thin column of smoke rising, faint at first, then darker. My mother followed my gaze, her expression unreadable. "I went back to the kitchen before we left," she said quietly. "Turned the stove on. Left a rag, soaked in alcohol, next to the curtain." The realization hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just planned to get us out, she'd planned to destroy the place entirely. The bus picked up speed, carrying us away from Clearwater Springs, from the prison that had been our home. The smoke grew taller behind us, touched by the orange of flames. We didn't speak for the rest of the ride. I knew we were free of the house, but I didn't yet know if we were free of him. The bus rumbled down the narrow road out of Clearwater Springs, its windows rattling with each bump. The further we got from town, the more I felt the knot in my chest loosen, but it never disappeared. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him in the distance, charging after us in his truck. The air inside smelled of diesel, and the faint tang of cigarette smoke from a man 2 rows ahead. My mother sat stiff beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't look out the window, didn't speak. I did. "Do you think he's—" I hesitated, then whispered, "dead?" Her eyes didn't leave the floor. "I think we're not going back," she said. Through the bus window, I could still see the plume of smoke in the far distance, now smeared across the evening sky like a bruise. I imagined the flames swallowing the wallpaper, the creak of the old floorboards giving way, the photographs curling black at the edges before turning to ash. Part of me wanted to mourn that house, not because of the man inside it, but because it had been my childhood home before the rot set in. The place where I'd once believed birthdays meant cake and laughter instead of silence and bruises. But that part of me was small now, shrinking against the relief that it might all be gone. 2 hours later, The bus hissed to a stop at the Kingsford station. The town was bigger than Clearwater Springs, more people, more noise, more chance to disappear. We stepped onto the platform, the cool night air washing over us. My mother gripped the suitcase handle like a lifeline. "We won't stay here long," she said. "It's too close. But we can rest tonight, get our bearings." We found a small, worn hotel 2 blocks away. The clerk didn't ask for identification, just the cash my mother slid across the counter. Our room was upstairs, with peeling wallpaper and a bed that sagged in the middle, but it had a lock on the door. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of traffic instead of the creak of his boots on the floorboards. By morning, my mother had a plan. She'd remembered hearing about a vineyard in Redwood Valley, 3 states west, where seasonal workers could live on the property while earning wages. "They don't ask too many questions," she said. We used most of the money for train tickets, with just enough left for food along the way. The journey took 2 days, passing through rolling farmland, mountains dusted with snow, and long stretches where the only signs of life were distant barns and fence posts leaning in the wind. For the first time in years, I felt invisible, and it was a blessing. Redwood Valley was smaller than I expected, nestled between hills draped in neat rows of grapevines. The air smelled faintly of soil and something sweet. We walked up the dirt drive to the vineyard's main building, where a tall man in a faded work shirt was hammering a sign into the ground. He had weathered skin and eyes the color of walnut wood. "Help you?" he asked, not unkindly. My mother didn't flinch. "We're looking for work. I can clean, cook, and sew. She can help in the fields." Mr. Briggs studied us for a long moment, then nodded. "Plenty of hands needed. Pays not much, but you can stay in one of the small cottages. You 2 got names?" My mother hesitated only briefly. "Irene," she said, touching her chest. Then, with a small squeeze to my shoulder, "And this is Margaret." It was the first time she'd said it aloud, my new name. Not Maggie. Not the one tied to that house. Margaret. The cottage was a simple 2-room structure with whitewashed walls and a tin roof that pinged softly when it rained. We shared a bed the first few months, partly because of the limited space, partly because neither of us could stand the thought of sleeping alone yet. My days were filled with work in the vines, pruning, tying, hauling baskets heavy with grapes until my arms ached. My mother kept the main house clean and prepared hearty meals for the workers. The routine was exhausting, but in a way, it saved me. Busy hands left less room for dark thoughts. By the following spring, my belly had begun to swell. The other workers noticed, of course, but in a place where everyone had a past they'd left behind, no one asked. When Emily was born on a rainy May morning, my mother cut the cord herself, wrapping the tiny bundle in a quilt she'd sewn from scraps of old vineyard uniforms. I looked at my daughter's face, the small nose, the dark tufts of hair, and felt something shift inside me. She was mine, not his, not even entirely the past. She was the first thing in my life untouched by his cruelty. I promised her right then that I would never let him near her, that she would never know his name. 2 months later, while I was hanging laundry on the line, Mr. Briggs walked up with a folded newspaper in his hand. "Thought you might want to see this," he said quietly. On the front page, in small print near the bottom, was the headline, "Man perishes in house fire on Willow Street." The article was brief. Neighbors reported smoke. Fire department arrived too late. Body found in the ruins. No mention of cause. No suspicion of foul play. I stared at the words until they blurred. My mother stood beside me, her face unreadable. Then she took the paper, folded it twice, and tossed it into the stove, without lighting a match. "We move forward," she said simply. The years passed quietly. I worked the vineyard each season, Emily growing like the vines themselves, her laughter carrying across the rows in summer. My mother aged quickly, her hair turning silver by the time I was 25, but there was a peace in her face I'd never seen in Clearwater Springs. When Mr. Briggs passed away, he left us the cottage and a small sum in his will, for the girls, as he'd written in his own hand. We decided to stay. The valley had become our home. Using part of the inheritance, I opened a small bakery in the center of town. It had wide front windows, a bell that jingled when customers entered, and shelves lined with sweet bread that sold out most mornings. People came to know me as Margaret, the baker with the shy smile, and the little girl, always helping in the corner. No one asked about our past. In Redwood Valley, you were judged by the work of your hands, not the weight of your history. I had almost convinced myself that chapter of my life was closed. But even with his death confirmed, the memories were stitched into me like a scar, not bleeding anymore, but always there beneath the skin. I am 73 years old now. The lines on my face tell their own story, not just of age, but of survival. My hands, roughened from years in the vineyard and the bakery, still remember every texture of my past: the coarse rope of the laundry line, the smooth coolness of the locket I hid under my pillow, the heat of that cast-iron skillet the night I struck him. Emily is 47, with 2 children of her own. She knows she was born from something dark, but she has never asked for details. I think she understands that some truths are like shards of glass, you can pick them up, but you'll bleed for it. For decades, I kept the full story locked inside me. Redwood Valley became my sanctuary because no one knew, and I was determined to keep it that way. People saw a hard-working woman, a devoted mother, someone who made sweet bread that reminded them of home. They didn't see the girl on Willow Street. But silence is its own kind of prison. It was a young woman named Carla who changed my mind. She came into the bakery one rainy afternoon, maybe 19 years old, with a bruise blooming purple along her jaw. She kept her head down as she ordered, but I recognized the way her hands trembled when she counted her change. I saw myself in her, not the baker, but the girl in the small bedroom waiting for the sound of footsteps outside her door. That night, I told Emily the whole truth. Every detail. She cried, she held me, and she told me something I'd never dared believe. It wasn't your shame to carry. The next week, I told Carla her bruise wasn't the end of her story. She looked at me like I'd handed her a key. Word spread quietly among the women in Redwood Valley. Soon, every Tuesday night, my bakery was closed not for inventory, as the sign on the door claimed, but for a small gathering in the back room. We drank tea, sometimes wine, and spoke the words we'd been taught never to say. Some cried. Some shook. Some stayed silent for months before speaking. But every woman who walked in left knowing she wasn't alone. By the time I was 60, the Tuesday group had grown too large for the bakery. The local library offered us a room, and from there, the Redwood Valley Women's Circle was born. It's still running today. I don't lead it anymore. My body tires easily, but I attend when I can, sitting quietly at the back, nodding when a woman glances my way for courage. Last spring, Emily convinced me to visit Clearwater Springs. The bus station has moved. The town square is gone, replaced by a strip mall. But Willow Street is still there, though the house is long gone. Where it once stood is nothing but an empty lot overgrown with wildflowers and weeds. The grass sways in the wind, and if you didn't know, you might think nothing had ever happened there. I stood at the edge of that lot for a long time, feeling the sun on my shoulders. It didn't hurt the way I expected. It felt hollow. Like the house, the fear had finally burned itself out. I bent down and laid a single marigold on the ground. My mother loved marigolds. She never got to see Redwood Valley, never got to hold Emily, but she gave me the courage to get us out. That flower was for her. And so here I am now, on the porch of my small home in Redwood Valley, telling you this story. I can hear the vineyard workers in the distance, their laughter carrying in the evening air. The smell of bread baking still drifts from my kitchen. Emily insisted we bake together this morning, just like old times. When I first sat down to speak these words aloud, I thought it would be impossible. I thought the memories would choke me. But instead, I find the telling is like opening a window in a long-shut room, the air rushing in, fresh and light. If you are listening to me now and you are still living in your own version of Willow Street, I want you to understand something. You are not the weak one for staying. You are not the coward for being afraid. You are the one enduring, surviving, breathing in the spaces where it feels impossible. One day, you will step outside, maybe in a rush of fire and fear like I did, maybe in a quiet moment when you finally choose yourself, and you will look back and realize the door to that place has shut for good. And on that day, you will feel something I didn't believe in for most of my life. Freedom. Margaret Hale is not the name I was born with. It's the name I chose, the name I built with my own two hands, kneading it into the dough of a new life until it rose into something that could feed me instead of starving me. The girl before Margaret didn't have choices. Margaret did. And Margaret still does. I am not the house on Willow Street. I am not his daughter. I am not what he did to me. I am a mother, a baker, a friend, a survivor. And if my story means anything to you, I hope it means this. You can build a life so far from the darkness that one day, when you turn to look back, you'll barely recognize the place you escaped from. The sky is pinking at the edges now, the sun slipping behind the hills. My tea has gone cold, but I don't mind. I think I'll sit here a while longer, listening to the world I've chosen, the one I fought for, the one I made. Because for the first time, I can truly say, I am home. You've sat with me through the shadows and the silences, through the cracks in the floorboards of a life I once thought I could never leave. I have carried these memories like sealed letters in my chest for decades, unopened, unread, because I believed that speaking them aloud would set the fire burning all over again. But I've learned that sometimes, the only way to keep a fire from consuming you is to let it burn its way out, into the open air, where it can no longer hurt you. I tell it now because I have lived long enough to know that secrets do not disappear. They live in the way you flinch at sudden noises, in the dreams that wake you at 3 a.m, in the way you guard your joy as if it might be stolen. And yet, joy can be rebuilt. To those of you who are still in your own Willow Street, whatever form it takes, hear me. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not the dirt beneath someone's boots. You are a seed, and seeds grow in the dark before they ever break the surface. When you are ready, the soil will give way, and the sun will be waiting for you. This is my legacy, not the pain I endured, but the life I chose afterward. My daughter, my grandchildren, the women I've met in our Tuesday circles. They are proof that what was done to me did not get the final word. If my story has touched you, share it. Let it reach the ears that need it most. And if you've carried your own silence, maybe let this be the nudge to open it, even if only a crack. Like this video, leave a comment, subscribe, not just for me, but so this corner of the world remains a place where truth can sit without shame. I was born under another name, in another life. That girl was buried in ash the day we left Willow Street. I am Margaret Hale now. And Margaret has learned that sometimes, closing a door is not the end, it's the first step into sunlight. And with that, I will set this story down, like an old suitcase at the edge of a road I'll never walk again.